Okay, I can't believe I have to follow that and talk about Melville. But since this is Melville Summer, call me Melville Summer here in Pittsfield, I thought we'd give you a little idea of what we have here in Pittsfield that belong to the family. This is going to be a little mystery item that we'll talk about at the very end of the presentation.
Mic up.
Or down? Is that better? Okay. Most people don't know that here in Pittsfield we have the largest collection of Melville family personal memorabilia related to the family in the whole world. So we have portraits and furniture and pieces of stuff that the family owned, and we have it here, and people can look at it whenever they want to here in the Melville Room. And most people will say, you know, why do we have this here in Pittsfield? Most of you probably know that Melville spent 13 years here in Pittsfield and wrote Moby Dick here. But his early life, he was over in New York State and places like that. But the Melville scholars have wanted to get a collection here, and one of the major scholars that wanted to do this was Dr. Henry Murray. And so he spent a lot of time cultivating relationships with Melville descendants in order to get them to donate their stuff and put it here in Pittsfield where a repository could be created. And finally in 1953 he succeeded in starting the Melville Room at the old Athenaeum on Bank Row. And this is a picture of Dr. Murray presenting the portrait of Maria Gansa Fort Melville, Herman's mother, to the Athenaeum. And here's Maria. She's hanging around these days, 60 years later, in the Melville Room at the new library. And to her right, she's got Alan Melville, her other son, and a copy of a painting of Herman there with her. And in the Melville Room, when you look inside what we think of as the treasure chest of Melville items, this is the right, as you walk in the room, this is to your right. And you can see a collection of Melville's prints. These were some of Melville's favorites, and some of them are still in the frames that Melville had them in and hung them on the wall. This is the desk at which Melville wrote Billy Budd. Also pictured are two of his prints, the Golden Bough and the Bay of Naples. He couldn't afford real art, so he bought prints and kept them around. He had about 450 of them. This is actually our greatest treasure that I think people would really love to see if they visited the Melville Room. This is the oil portrait of Melville done in 1847 by Asa Twitchell. It's one of only 2 oil portraits that were ever done of Melville during his lifetime, and it was done early in his career before Moby Dick was published. It hangs on the south wall in the Melville Room above the library table that you see here, which was at Arrowhead, and which Melville may have sometimes sat to write Moby Dick. We don't know that for sure, but it's possible. On the table, you see to the right, there's a wooden box that Melville kept his papers in, and to the left, a tin box that Mrs. Melville kept his manuscripts in. And in the center is a facsimile of an 1856 passport from one of Melville's trips to Europe and the Middle East. This passport is the only known document that has both Melville and Hawthorne's signature on the same document. To the left is a description of Melville, what he looked like, and his handwriting, and to the right is an image of Hawthorne's signature on the back. Hawthorne had to vouch for Melville in Liverpool at the beginning of his trip. This is another item in the collection. This is an engraving of Hawthorne that was done in 1851. And when Hawthorne was leaving the Berkshires, he and Melville had had a friendship, and he was leaving the Berkshires in 1851 to go back to Salem because he couldn't take the winters. Mrs. Hawthorne gave that to Melville. This is the south wall. In the center is Elizabeth Melville, Herman's wife's desk. And in the case on the left are a few of the main things that he collected in his travels to the South Seas. There's this is a picture of the chimney room at Arrowhead, and the slippers that were in the previous panel, you can see way back in Melville's time, were hanging there. And here's the little guy that was in the first presentation. It belonged to Herman Melville. It was his Chinese god of contentment that he always had in his study. These are some of the other little things that we have that Melville owned. His pipe. Over up in the right-hand corner is the arrowhead that he found on his property, that he named Arrowhead after. His penknife, his custom house badge, the door plate from the house. We also have a collection of what are called cased photographs, in addition to some 600 other photographs, and these are just some of them. That's Elizabeth, the children. That's Herman in 1860. Herman and his brother Thomas. Elizabeth with one of the children, and that's Melville's brother Alan on the bottom. We have over 600 family photographs and 300 of Melville's art prints, and we did a grant a few years ago to have them reproduced so that people could use them whenever they were in the Melville Room. So that's what we call our service album of reproductions. This is just gives you a little image of the research area of the room. So we do get scholars from all over the world who come here to use our materials. You can even read Moby Dick in Russian and Japanese and Chinese if you come into the Melville Room. That's once you get through the Moby Dick in English. This is the little treasure that I showed you at the beginning. This is a model of a temple of Sirius that Melville picked up on his travels. And it's kind of odd because most of these temples have an even number of things in the front, pillars in the front, and this one doesn't. So we don't know if it's a real if there was a real temple or not.